Commission meeting to order for November 28th. Could we have a roll call, please?
Chairperson Sattler?
Present.
Vice Chair Monroy?
Present.
Commissioner Borders?
Present.
Commissioner Doors? Commissioner Eswine? Commissioner Preston?
Here.
Commissioner Tingle?
Here.
A quorum's present.
Thank you. Commissioner Preston, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the Planning Commission, including any matters that are not specifically included in the agenda as an action item. Is there any public comment at this time? Seeing none, review and approval of minutes. Is there any questions, changes, or problems? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'm sorry. I move that the minutes be approved as written. I'm asleep.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
Abstain.
Abstain, thank you. No, there'll be at each item. There's public comment on each item. This is more for if there's something that's not on the agenda or something you wanted to discuss. Certainly, thank you. Lee, any modification of the agenda?
No modification. Just want to make a note of the little bit of meeting logistics. It's a little bit different today, so we have a lot of items scheduled for the 9th for this session. We'll take them in order. We also have 2 items scheduled to come back at 5 p.m. this evening. So if you're interested in the rezoning on Cochise, that zoning map amendment, that will start at 5 o'clock. There's a second item after that. That's the vintage project, and just to note, they've requested and can be granted a continuance. That matter will not be considered this evening. The action on the agenda is just to continue indefinitely that matter. And if for anybody interested in vintage, it will be re-noticed to all the neighbors before it's put back on the agenda.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. E1 MISC-18-165 for possible action to consider a request for an extension on the expiration date of SUP-16-090, a special use permit to allow the operation of an unlimited gaming casino, bar, and additional signage on property zone retail commercial located at 3246 North Carson Street, APN 007-462-06.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hope Sullivan, Planning Manager. On September 28, 2016, the Planning Commission approved a special use permit to allow the operation of a casino, bar, and additional signage on the property located at 3246 North Carson Street. That action of the Planning Commission was appealed to the board, and on November 17, 2016, the board upheld the decision of the Planning Commission. Condition number 4 of the special use permit requires that the use established within 12 months of final action and authorizes the Community Development Director to issue a single 1-year extension. On October 20th, 2017, the Community Development Director did issue a 1-year time extension based on ongoing litigation. There's now different litigation at the property, of which the business owner who obtained the special use permit is not a party to that litigation. The litigation is involving various owners of the Northtown Shopping Center and is concerning certain restrictive covenants, or private restrictive covenants. So given this ongoing litigation that, again, this business owner is not a party to, the business owner is reluctant to invest in the shopping center until that litigation is concluded. The Municipal Code Section 1802-0808C authorizes the Planning Commission to approve additional extensions of time in the event that circumstances beyond the control of the applicant result in a failure to commence the use. The Planning Commission decision is subject to consideration of the continued appropriateness of the use. Staff does find that the ongoing litigation that's currently occurring is beyond the control of the applicant. But the applicant has requested that this special use permit be continued until 1 year after the conclusion of litigation. Well, that's a date unknown. Staff cannot find that there will be continued appropriateness at a future unknown date. Therefore, staff does not agree with the request of the applicant. Having said that, the staff would support a 3-year extension. I believe that we can be fairly certain that within the next 3 years, the circumstances that caused the approval of the special use permit will continue to be in place. So the staff is recommending that the special use permit expiration date be extended to November 17th, 2021. Sev Carlson, representing the the applicant for the special use permit, is present, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Hope in the event at 3 years it wasn't, they would have the option to come back and look for further if it was still in litigation.
That's correct. I'm just not comfortable with anything past 3 years, and but I also don't want to make him come back every year either. I feel like 3 years is a good time frame.
Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Borders?
If by some miracle the litigation is settled in the next 6 months, does he still have 3 years to perform, or is it 6 months? Is it a year after the litigation is settled? Up to 3 years.
It's up to 3 years should you take the action the staff's recommended. And I did speak to Mr. Carlson about, he's on the sidelines. He's not engaged, and I'll let him speak for himself. He's not engaged in the litigation, but I was sort of saying, how long is this really going to go on? And when that happens, what's the appeal date? And so on and so forth. So I kind of, in engaging with him, identified 3 years as reasonable, plus the fact that I don't think circumstances will change to a point where you wouldn't be supporting the special use permit.
Well, it may be, but the question is, do we grant a 3-year extension that may or may not be necessary? Because the extension right now is for a year, and that's pretty much what we do with everything. And if this is settled within a year, the applicant shouldn't have 2 years to not do anything. He should have 1 year from whenever it's settled.
I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm trying to look for a hard date on the calendar as opposed to a moving target, which is why I identified a hard date as opposed to looking at an action to occur and letting that action determine the date.
So Commissioner Board, you're kind of looking at determination of the legal, it would be 1 year, kind of what he originally requested.
Well, within.
Any other questions for staff? And I see the applicant has come forward. First of all, you're comfortable with the change or whatever that the staff has suggested?
Mr. Chairman, Sev Carlson, for the record, on behalf of Silver Bullet of Nevada, the applicant. Yes, we're comfortable with staff's recommendation, and we'd conform our request to the 3-year period. It's our understanding that the 4 parties that have some level of property ownership interest in Northtown are in the midst of discovery, so we haven't even had a trial yet in this case, and I don't want to predict how long the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court might take on a decision that one of those parties may appeal. We are watching it closely, and certainly I can assure the city that if the litigation concludes prior to that 3-year period, we'll let staff know of that, and then it becomes a time for us to make our fish or cut bait on whether we want to move forward.
Any questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir. Seeing none, I'll bring it back for discussion or a motion. Thank you. First of all, any public comment on this item? See no public comment on this item, I'll bring it back for questions, discussion, or a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Commissioner Board.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that, if I can find it, I just lost it, I'm sorry.
Recommended.
Yeah. To move to extend the expiration date of SPU 16-090 special use permit to allow the operation of an unlimited gaming casino, bar, and additional signage on property located at 3246 North Carson Street to November 17th, 2021.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
A second.
Commissioner Tingle, second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
One abstain.
Oh, one abstain. Thank you. Jerry,
All right.
Commissioner Preston, would you clarify? Conflict, I'm guessing?
Well, what I've got here is I actually represent an owner of part of the parcel, but he doesn't seem to be a party to the litigation. So that's what I figured I better just abstain on this.
Ben Johnson from the District Attorney's Office. That's fine if Commissioner Tingle believes she has a conflict. I'm sorry. Excuse me, Preston believes she has a conflict.
Appreciate that. Thank you. E2 VAR-18-160 to consider requests for a variance on the front and rear setback so as to have a front setback of 10 feet where 19 feet is required and to have a rear setback of 5 feet where 10 feet is required on property zone single-family 12,000 square feet. Plan Unit Development SF12-P located at 113 Drysdale Court, APN 007-633-02. Hope?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The applicant, as the chair said, is requesting a variance to the front and the rear setbacks. I put on the slide a picture of the lot configurations, and it's funny because when I started to write my talking points, I was about to say this is a corner lot, and it's not, which is sort of why we're here. It has open space in front of the lot. It has a park in the rear of the lot, and the frontage is on Drysdale Court. But when we look at the other houses in the area, you'll see there's a rhythm to the house. So what the house is on the street. So what the applicant's seeking to do is essentially rotate the house to continue that same rhythm, if you will. You always hear me say that zoning is land use and dimensional criteria. We don't get variances very often. Variances are asking for relief from the dimensional criteria, things like setbacks, heights, things like that. When you're considering a variance, I'm going to kind of go a little more in depth on this because it's rare that you actually get one. It's rare that I actually support one because it's difficult to make the findings. The findings are you have to have circumstances that are applicable to the property. It has to be necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights, and it cannot adversely affect the health and safety or be materially detrimental to public welfare or materially injurious to the property in the neighborhood. When we look at this site plan, what you'll see in terms of the lot, it's a little weird. Like I said, when you go out there, your mind tells you it's a corner lot, but it's not. And what you have is a public park in the rear, which has a trail coming out to the north of this property. You have open space in the front, so it only has frontage on one side, yet it's along a road where all the other streets are fronting, have a front door looking to what is oriented here to the south. Because of the way this property is configured with the park and with the open space, the variance will allow this property to be oriented so that side yards are next to side yards, backyards are next to backyards, backyards are next to the park, and so forth. So I believe the variance is necessary to allow this home to have a similar orientation to the other homes. In terms of finding two, I think when you have backyards next to backyards, side yards next to side yards, it improves everyone's enjoyment of their property, and this variance is necessary to accomplish that. And third, the modification of the orientation, and again, it's the same thing. It's creating consistency in the neighborhood, which I think is going to be beneficial to the entire neighborhood. So staff is recommending approval with conditions. Again, it's rare that you get a variance, and it's rare that I support it, but I believe this is one that can be supported. The applicant is present, Sam Landis, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Questions for staff?
I have one.
Commissioner Borders?
Is the open space, the little triangle lot, is that a common element to Silver Oak and does not belong to the property owner?
Correct.
Would the applicant like to come forward, please?
Sam Landis, Lantern Investments, the applicant.
First of all, Mr. Landis, do you agree with the conditions of approval that the staff has recommended?
Yes.
Thank you. Questions for the applicant? Seeing none? Okay. That's all, sir. Thank you. Is there something you'd like to add or
Nope.
whatever to Hope's
I'm good.
presentation as well? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take public comment at this time if there's any public comment on this item. Well, seeing none, we'll bring it back for further discussion or a motion. Commissioner Tingle.
I move to approve VAR-18-160, a variance to allow a front setback of 10 feet where 19 feet is required, and to have a rear setback of 5 feet where 10 feet is required on property zoned single-family 12,000 planned unit development located at 1113 Drysdale Court, based on the findings and subject to the recommended conditions of approval in the staff report.
We have a motion. We have a second.
I'll second.
Commissioner Monroy. Go in there. Almost. Thank you. Yeah, need a bigger bucket. E3 SUP-18-150 for possible action to consider a request for a special use permit for a wall that extends the maximum height limit on property zone single-family 1 acre SF1A located at 870 East Oberlin Street.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The applicant is seeking to locate a 6-foot wall in the front setback. If you've been to the site, you saw the wall is already constructed. The development standards 1.13A limit the height of a solid wall in the front setback to 3 feet. The front setback in the single-family 1 acre zoning district is 30 feet. In this case, the front is East Overland Street. So you see that you have over 300 linear feet of frontage on East Overland Street, and the applicant has constructed, and his full intent is to have 65 linear feet of wall constructed along this frontage. It essentially is creating a backyard area, if you were able to see the site. The wall is 15 feet back from the paved surface of the road. Development Standards 1.12.7 allows the Planning Commission to to permit walls in excess of the ordinance requirements if you can make the findings for a special use permit. When you're reviewing the findings, there's 7 findings of fact that must be made in the affirmative. Staff has reviewed those findings of fact in the staff report, and we have made all 7 findings in the affirmative. Mr. Mandoki, the property owner, is present, and I'm happy to go in more depth if you'd like, or answer questions. Thank you.
Having been out there and looked at the site, it would be, this makes up about 20 feet, or 20% roughly of the frontage of the road. And if it were a 3-foot wall, it appeared to me there wouldn't be much privacy at all in that side yard or backyard. But I don't know if you, I just noticed that when I was out there as well. Any questions for staff? Seeing none, would the applicant like to come forward, please? There you go.
Good morning. First time.
No problem.
My name is Steve Mandoki. I've constructed that wall about 7 years ago, not thinking it would be an issue.
First of all, sir, are you comfortable with anyway, there are not actually any recommendations for approval.
There are conditions of
Oh, excuse me. There we go. Are you comfortable with happy with the conditions of approval and agree with them that staff has put forward, the 7 items? Thank you. Questions for the applicant? Seeing none, I guess that's all we need right now. Is there something you'd like to add at all to the presentation?
Not at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We'll take public comment on this item at this time. Is there any public comment on this particular item? Seeing none, I'll bring it back again for discussion or a motion. Commissioner Preston?
I'd like to put them in a motion, please. Move to approve SUP. I'm sorry. I move to approve SUP-18-150, a request for a special use permit for a 6-foot wall in the front setback on property zone single-family 1 acre located at 870 East Overland Street, based on the findings and subject to the conditions of approval contained in the staff report.
We have a motion, and I'll second that motion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, your microphone.
Sorry, I thought I'd hit it. I keep hitting the priority instead. Again, I'll start over. For possible action, to consider a request for a special use permit for accessory building to exceed 75% of the size of the primary residence on property zone single-family 5-acre SS 5A located 6454 Sierra Vista Lane, APN 010-503-10. Okay, Ms. Green?
Hope Sullivan, Planning Manager. This is a request to build a 1,008 square foot accessory building, essentially a garage, which will result in the accessory buildings being 89% of the primary residential structure, thus exceeding the 75% of the size of the primary building. When we run into a situation where the accessory buildings, the sum of them will exceed 75% of the size of the primary buildings, it's subject to a special use permit, and only the Planning Commission can issue a special use permit. The subject property is 5 acres. The building is proposed to be 22 feet tall and utilize a Louisiana Pacific Smart Panel and composite shingle roofing. The Planning Commission may issue the special use permit upon making the 7 required findings of fact. The staff was able to make each of those findings in the affirmative, as noted in the staff report, and is recommending approval. The Donna and Mitchell Mattis are present, and I'm happy to go more in-depth or answer any questions.
Go ahead, Commissioner Borders.
On number 14, I'm sorry. Can you explain that?
That's part of the urban wildland interface zone requirements. So because this is a remote location where you can have the development close to the wildfire areas, the fire department enforces that code. There's not public water available, so they're looking for storage of water. So if they needed to suppress it, there would be a water source available.
Is there any kind of a size or anything else required, or just the fact that, I mean, do you meet that requirement with a bucket or 50,000 gallons or?
Again, this is one of these requirements that actually in retrospect should not even be in the conditions of approval, because it's a code requirement in the fire code and in the wildland urban interface zone. So if you were to eliminate this requirement, the fire department would still enforce it. The applicant does have the intent to comply with this requirement, and going forward, we can be more specific. But no, I don't believe a bucket would satisfy the requirement.
Well, I'm just thinking if I was the applicant and I read this condition, I wouldn't know what, was sufficient. So
what you're saying is, in confined, going along with code, they'd have to do this anyway, whether it was in our conditions or not.
That's correct.
And I also noticed that even though it's quite a bit larger than the residence, there's an existing shop that's on the place as well, because it's only a little more than 1% of the land use requirement, which is normally 5%, I believe, if it was more than that.
You're correct. Had the cumulative square footage of the accessory buildings exceeded 5% of the lot area, they would be required to obtain a special use permit from the Planning Commission, but because of the size of the lot or the buildings in proportion to the size of the lot, you are at 1 and change in terms of percentage.
And to clarify, they do not have an attached or detached garage in this property at this time, so this is filling that need?
They have the shop building that you referenced. I don't believe there's a detached garage.
Any other questions for staff? Would the applicant like to come forward, please?
Oh, there we go. Could you hear me?
First of all, sir, are you comfortable with all the conditions of approval that
Yes.
staff has recommended? Thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant? Is there anything, sir, you'd like to add, or ma'am, to what the staff has said, or?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. All right, I guess that's all we need at this point then.
All right.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on this particular item? If there is, please come forward at this time. Seeing none, I'll bring it back again for either further discussion or recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion.
Mr. Borders.
I move to approve SUP-18-152, a request for a special use permit for an accessory building that exceeds 75% of the size of the primary residence on a property zoned single-family 5-acre located at 6454 Sierra Vista Lane, APN 010-503-10, based on the findings and subject to the conditions of approval contained in the staff report.
We have a motion, we have a second. Mr. Preston seconds. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Thank you.
Mark, we're putting the next two together.
Okay, so I should read them both at the same, thank you. Moving on, we'll, ZMA-18-155 for possible action to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors regarding a zoning map amendment for a 119.1 acre site from general industrial to single-family 6,000 on approximately 68.3 acres, multifamily apartments on approximately 18 acres, general commercial on approximately 13.9 acres, and public regional for approximately 18.9 acres for property located southeast of U.S. Highway 50 and northeast of Deer Run Road within the B&T specific plan area, APNs 008-52-1-54-55-89-90 and 008-522-16-17-18, 008-531-59 and -60. Also, along with this item, for possible TSM 18-154, for possible action to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors regarding a tentative subdivision map approximate application to create 270 single-family residential lots, 9 common area parcels, 3 remainder parcels, and approximately 13.36 acres of right-of-way within the 119.1 acre project area located southeast of U.S. Highway 50 and northeast of Deer Run Road within the B&T specific plans, APN 008-54-54-55-89-90, 008-522-16-17-18, and 008-531-59-60. Hope my mic was on. Heather?
Thank you. Heather Ferris for the record. As the chair noted in the introduction to this project, there are two concurrent applications for your consideration today. First, I'll discuss the zoning map amendment. The project site is approximately 119 acres and is located in the Eastern Portal, Virginia and Truckee Railroad Gateway Specific Plan. The purpose of the specific plan area is to provide for cohesive development, create a gateway into Carson City, protect visual resources, encourage public-private partnerships, and encourage public-private cooperation in creating public access trails and recreational opportunities. The Planning Commission considered a master plan amendment from industrial to mixed-use residential in February of this year, and in March, the Board of Supervisors approved that amendment. The property is currently zoned general industrial. With the master plan amendment being approved earlier this year, the next logical step in the process is a zoning map amendment to make the zoning consistent with the master plan. Because the master plan is mixed-use residential, the proposed zonings must provide for a mix of uses consistent with the interim mixed-use evaluation criteria. The mixed-use residential land use designation requires a mix of zonings that is predominantly residential with complementary commercial uses representing 10 to 30% of the total land area. The proposed zoning districts include 68.3 acres of single-family 6,000, 18 acres of multifamily apartment zoning, 13.9 acres of general commercial zoning, which is approximately 11.6% of the total land area, and 18.9 acres of public regional zoning. This mix of zoning districts will allow for a mix of housing types and uses, including open space and trails, which are consistent with the mixed-use evaluation criteria. As shown on this diagram, you can see that there was some thought given to the location of the proposed residential zoning in relation to the existing industrial uses to the north and west of the project site. The proposed general commercial zoning acts as a logical transition and buffer between the existing industrial uses to the west, while the general commercial and public regional zonings acts as that transition and buffer between the industrial to the north and the proposed residential to the south. The multifamily apartment zoning also provides for a logical transition between the general commercial and the single-family zoning. So essentially, we're moving from the more intensive industrial uses to the north and west to the less intensive general commercial and then single-family residential as you get deeper into the project site. The applicant has concurrently applied for a tentative subdivision map proposing 270 single-family residential lots, 3 remainder parcels, 2 of which would be zoned general commercial and 1 would be zoned multifamily apartments, and 9 common area parcels. There are no proposed developments for the remainder lots at this time. The single-family residential lots will range in size from 6,000 to 17,950 square feet. They will meet the requirements of the single-family 6,000 zoning for density, parcel size, setbacks, etc. The project site is accessed from Highway 50 using Draco Way as the primary project entrance. The applicant will be improving Draco Way to include landscaping, sidewalks, and bike lanes. The traffic impact study that was prepared as part of this project concluded that a traffic signal would be needed at Highway 50 and Draco, and the other intersections within the development are anticipated to function at acceptable levels of service at project build-out. If you recall from the meetings earlier this year during the master plan amendment, the master plan had not previously been amended due to the old landfill that's been identified at the site and the need to work with NDEP on the remediation of the site. Prior to the March approval of the master plan amendment, the applicant had received NDE approval for the remedial action plan with additional requirements. The remediation of the site will include the construction of a road within the landfill site, removing any exposed landfill waste and contaminated soil, and capping the extent of the landfill with a soil cap. The site will also be revegetated, and recreational trails would be installed. There would be no other development other than the road and the trails within the site. The extent of the landfill is shown here, but it's also shown in more detail on pages G1, G3, and G4 of the tentative map for your reference. Essentially, the landfill site would be contained entirely in the 18.9 acre common area parcel in the northern portion of the project site. There are 3 findings of fact that the Planning Commission must consider in forwarding a recommendation on a zoning map amendment on to the Board of Supervisors. They include compliance with the master plan, compatibility with existing adjacent land uses, and impacts on existing planned public services or facilities. Staff was able to make all 3 of these findings in the affirmative. Based on what staff heard at previous meetings regarding the master plan amendment, as well as public comments that we've received regarding these applications, I would like to focus on finding 2, which is compatibility with the adjacent land uses. And I touched on this a bit earlier as well. The proposed location of the commercial zoning and open space provides for transition and buffers between the existing industrial uses and the proposed residential portion of the development. The location of the multifamily apartment zoning also provides for that logical transition between the general commercial and the proposed single-family residences. So with these transitions and buffers, staff feels that we're able to make finding 2, providing for project compatibility with the adjacent industrial land uses. With regard to the tentative subdivision map, there are 12 findings the Planning Commission must consider in forwarding a recommendation on a tentative subdivision map onto the Board of Supervisors. Staff was able to make all findings in the affirmative. I would like to point out that if the zoning map amendment is not recommended for approval, finding 6 of the tentative subdivision map findings cannot be made in the affirmative. Also, based on public comment during the master plan amendment, staff has included recommended conditions of approval requiring a disclosure to be recorded notifying any buyers their proximity to the existing industrial uses, as well as their proximity to the landfill and pistol and rifle range. And that is condition 35 for your reference. Staff is recommending approval of both the zoning map amendment and tentative subdivision map. There are 42 recommended conditions of approval for your consideration with the tentative subdivision map. You should have a memo from me outlining some changes to the recommended conditions of approval. Since the staff report packet was released, staff has been in discussions with the applicant's representative, and we've identified some opportunity for clarification regarding 3 of the conditions of approval, and those are conditions 19, 21, and 37. And after sleeping on it last night, I think we need some additional clarification on condition 37A to make it clear as to where the off-site roadway landscaping will be. So I would propose amending 37A to read ownership and maintenance in perpetuity of all open space, common areas, landscaping, off-site roadway landscaping along Draco Way from the northern portion of the site to Highway 50 and off-street trails within the development. We have received a few public comment letters and emails, which has been provided to you. Staff does believe that most of these concerns have been addressed in the conditions, but I'm available for questions.
One of the late items that came in from Tayo America, I believe that may have come up at one point when we were discussing this earlier. I appreciate their showing their concerns and being upfront with that information as far as possible odors, et cetera. Having had the meeting we had last month with odor difficulties and all that stuff. I mean, is there any further address to this or thoughts on this item?
We have proposed a condition for a disclosure that would have to be recorded against all properties, disclosing the proximity to the industrial uses. So any new owners of the property would be notified.
I understand that, but I'm a little concerned. I mean, you sign so much when you're buying something or whatever. I mean, this may be something they sign and not, this could be in my mind, this could be a real issue. The first time that those odors go floating through this housing development, that they're going to go, whatever. I don't know how we can avert possibly not opening that can of worms. I don't know if anything, there were a couple recommendations in there as far as trees or not, I mean.
So one of their recommendations was the proximity and density of the residential development to their property. If I can get the cursor to come up. Their property is here. They also own this property, which is vacant. Then we have a little over 3 acres of general commercial, and then some open space before we even get to the single-family residential development.
But I don't know if there's any way if that, we could recommend that general commercial be developed for, maybe that would help if there was some buildings there or something. I don't know. I guess, okay, thank you. Other comments to Mr. Preston?
Yeah, I'm looking at this, that you're putting in an HOA, and HOA is part of the requirement. And any time that somebody purchases in a HOA, they actually receive a resale certificate that would give them notice. If this was a part of the requirement of notice, they would see this prior to the actual purchase. So I think that would eliminate that, because you'd have notice prior to purchase, you'd have notice and, upon signing. But I think that those two notices would actually eliminate that concern.
Even though this notice is just general for, they're close to industrial area or whatever, it wouldn't specifically state odors or anything else. Okay, thank you for that. The questions for staff, Commissioner Borders?
Again, on item 37, the homeowners association or whatever maintenance association that they're going to form, that's primarily an instrument for the residential areas, but the apartment houses and the industrial or the commercial areas I assume would be a member of that association. And how you divide that up and establish fees and things, I think is a really difficult situation. I'm not sure that a homeowners association is the right answer, but some sort of an association is. Either that or they're separate. There's got to be an overhead, a master association, and then 3 parts. But that's for the developer to figure out. But I think it's a little bit naive on our part if we think that that's going to solve the total problem, because it's going to create some sort of a big nightmare, I think, as it develops, deciding who pays what share.
Thank you. Commissioner Preston?
I think one thing I actually have over 20 years worth of managing associations, and I've had multi-use developments, and usually it's done on a proportionate share as far as the land. So on that, they would get a percentage of votes under, like you said, under an umbrella membership. So I think, but that is something that the developer is going to be, putting in as far as the HOA is concerned.
Mr. Tingle?
This isn't a question more than it is a comment. Again, after last month's meeting with the group from Lyon County related to the asphalt plant and the odors that they were experiencing, while you might be noticed when you are purchasing a property that you are near an industrial zone, that does not tell you that, oh, by the way, come summer and the afternoon winds that come up that can blow at 15 to 20 steady, that you're going to get that noxious smell, and while it might not be a health hazard, it's still going to be an annoyance, and I think that should this get approved and built, et cetera, at some point the subsequent planning commission members are going to be hearing from those residents that this is not good, and we didn't know it was going to be like this, and we're not happy, and that was it was a pretty contentious meeting last month about the whole aroma that comes from that asphalt plant. And so if Teo is coming forward saying, hey, this could potentially be a problem, and we're trying to say, let's look at this first before we go through and approve this zoning amendment. I just think that we're hiding our head in the sand if we don't say, hold the phone here.
And I had one other question for staff. Are there any guidelines or requirements on the cap of the landfill? So, I mean, is there a certain depth they have to go or whatever so that little guys aren't out there digging in the dirt and finding things they shouldn't? Or?
I would defer that question to the applicant. They've been the ones working with NDEP closely on that.
Commissioner Preston.
I'd like to point out that I realize that last month's meeting was very contentious, but I think one of the reasons is that they had an established neighborhood in a different county that was not notified. That was very paramount, and that the plant came after the neighborhood. And this right here, the plant exists. It's in the same county. These people are purchasing houses. I mean, they're grown-ups. They have to have some kind of due diligence. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I have on that.
And I understand that, but like Commissioner Tingle, when you've got 270 families there, somebody's not going to be happy the first time that odor drifts through the neighborhood.
And for the record, I think our due diligence is to make sure that we're planning the land in a smart way. So I think it's worth conversation.
We can further have. Anything else for staff? Would the applicant like to come forward, please?
Chris Baker with Manhart Consulting here on behalf of the applicant. I'd like to thank Heather for her great overview of the project. I don't know that I need to add too many project details. We are in agreement with staff's recommendation for approval and the conditions as amended. I think great points have been brought up here. Anytime you're developing realistically, this functions as a very large infill parcel. It was earmarked in the previous master plan for mixed-use residential or mixed-use commercial designation at the master plan level. We're trying to follow through with that, but when you're putting forth a development plan adjacent to existing uses, you do need to be sensitive to those uses. So, I do echo Commissioner Preston's ideas of the fact that we're in a unique situation where typically complaints come with newly established industrial uses in allowed zones adjacent to existing neighborhoods. This is kind of the inverse, where we understand, anyone who's been to the site understands that we have industrial uses that are existing next to this land. We're trying to develop it with its highest and best use. There was a lot of discussion about this at the master plan meeting. The zoning map was not proposed at that time, so you really couldn't see what we were looking at as far as buffering the industrial with commercial and some of the open space there. We've been sensitive. If you see, on the diagram adjacent to those industrial uses, we actually have over 500 feet before the nearest residential unit. Again, odor's odor. I think the trick here is working with that adjacent industrial partner and helping them understand what their business is, what their side effects are, and how it's going to affect the neighbors, and craft the language for our disclosure statement to their approval. I think driving through any of these industrial uses, that's how you have to get there. There's only two ways in and out, and there's industrial uses on both of those. Again, people buying here are going to be grown-ups, so, I'll echo that comment. they'd be pretty naive to complain after the fact if they're getting disclosure notices either through a HOA or through a landscape maintenance district or association. They're in their title docs, and if working with the adjacent neighbor, we have exactly what they're to expect. We'd agree with that addition to the condition and go with it.
It would be nice, or I think good, if someone spoke with Mr. Harrison or whatever, and, maybe there's ways through ventilation, whatever, he inexpensively could clean that, whatever. So I don't know if there's been any contact or needs to be, but again, that's a possibility. I mean, he had some recommendations to help alleviate, and I don't know if he fully understands your development and how it's being set up. So have you met with him at all or have any plans?
We have not to date, but we will, for sure.
And as far as the cap goes, that I was asking about.
So NDEP actually set the cap. It's a 2-foot landscape cap across the whole previous landfill site. What happened here was the majority of the material was actually taken out and put in the existing Carson dump. When we did, the geotech did pothole stuff, most of the material that was still, remaining was 12 feet deep or further. So they're recommending the 2-foot cap across it, and that is above and beyond, if we do any landscaping or any sort, it's 2 foot plus whatever is necessary for that. But as proposed, we're leaving it as undisturbed open space, re-vegging it as necessary per the conditions. If you've been out there, there's a good chunk of utilized trail network now. We're just going to clean that up and have the association take care of it and make sure that's available to the public.
Thank you. Other questions for the applicant?
The cap that you're putting down, what is that composed of? Is it just decomposed granite? Is it dirt? Just where?
It's just fill. So it'll be fill from the site.
Other questions for the applicant? Seeing none, thank you. At this point, we'll open this for public comment. If you come forward and state your name, and great. Sir, would you be kind enough to turn that mic off next to you? It might interfere with the one you're turning on. Thank you.
Hello, my name is John Michael Gray, Chief Administrative Officer of Triangle Labs. We're at 6101 Morgan Mill Road, so we are Tayo's neighbor. We have a couple of concerns with this proposed development. We moved in 12 years ago as a general industrial zone with the anticipation of that. There's a reason we're out by the landfill and kind of sequestered from the neighborhood. Our first concern is the disruption of the land itself in the building phase. We have a class 10,000 clean room. We make advanced printed circuit boards for military applications. So any influx of extra dust, debris will be brought into our building, and to avoid that, it's going to be an incredible capital intensive cost to remedy and create close to a hermetically sealed environment for that situation. Past that, we're concerned about Morgan Mill Road being opened. Right now it dead ends, and if that opens up, that's going to open up thousands of cars every day, and I'm not sure of the plan, so I don't know if that is the case, but currently it dead ends, and there's actually a really big drainage problem right now. So a major retaining or sound wall would have to be built behind us and along Morgan Mill Road, in our opinion. But again, I can't comment on the exact design. And if you talk about smells, just that everybody brought up, these residents, and I'm all for development in Carson City. I've lived here 12 years. I love our city. But these people will be between a landfill and a general industrial zone, and there are now the newly legalized commercial grow operations in the area. I smell it daily driving by. Mommy, what's that smell? It's going to be for multiple smells, not just what's in the area. So there are definitely some concerns to consider for such a major site, and we just want to voice our concerns about the development.
Good morning. I'm Bob White. I'm a director at Tayo America. So you've seen our letters. We sent you one in February and then one most recently November 20th. I want to thank Heather for coming out. I invited her out 2 weeks ago, and gave her a smell test, walked her around our plant. I don't smell anything there because I've been there 20 years, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Once in a while, when the weather conditions are right, cold air blowing certain directions, and the prevailing winds go from south to the northeast, just like our letter states. It only takes one person to complain, and then you guys are going to get an earful. So we're just wanting you to know in advance what's going to happen. We're all for the development. We think you guys have put in a lot of thought, a lot of money in the plan. It's a great plan. What we're not real pleased with is the proximity. If it can be increased buffer, move it east, north, give a little more buffer space so that wind can drift it up and out. Not that it happens all the time, but once in a while somebody will smell something. We built there in 1994 because it was an industrial area on the edge of the city limits going to the desert. We put in a lot of thought into it. We've been there for 24 years. And we just have flashbacks to the custom stamping problem we had on Fairview many years ago when development came around it. We just don't want to see that headache for you guys in the city. But we like working and living in Carson City. One other disclosure you might include is the rifle range noise. I live down by the river and I hear it all the time. And the people in that development are going to hear that all the time. Not with, also the smell. So it's a great plan. Just I think doing what you're doing is needed.
Just a question for you, sir. The odors are created from getting the odor out of the plant or whatever from the process you're doing. Is there any other things that could be done to alleviate that aren't extremely costly or whatever this odor?
Over the years, we've modified formulations to remove any strong scents. We have done that, but the industry requires certain products. One of our customers is Triangle. For what they build, they require a certain product, and you can't make that without certain raw materials. And they just happen to give off some odors.
And can you estimate roughly, does this happen monthly or 300 days a year?
Oh, no, it's not frequent.
Okay.
It's not frequent. You could smell something when you walked in, slightly.
Heather Ferris again. When I was in the building, I could smell, it smelled like epoxy, essentially. But when I was outside, that day, there was no odor.
Right, and it depends on what's being cooked at the time, what chemical formulation is being required. It depends on the wind direction, the temperature. There's a lot of variables.
So it's not something like through the daily process, every day that odor is going to be floating around or whatever odors there are.
Correct, yeah. Thank you.
Other public comment? One more before Chris, there's some other. You'd state your name for us, sir, appreciate it.
Yeah. Good morning, James Young. I'm a resident on North Deer Run Road. And I just have a few comments. I'm not really prepared, as I just found out about this a couple of days ago, but my biggest concern is on Morgan Mill Road. The excess of traffic that's going to be coming out the back way, not necessarily using the signal, which most likely with this amount of development is going to start backing up on Highway 50. And they're going to be coming down the back way onto Deer Run and backing up that signal. And I don't know how much thought has been really put into that. I know you did a traffic study. Traffic studies don't always reveal, in my opinion, what the real world's all about. And I can understand on Draco with that signal being put in. You've got traffic coming down at high speeds down Highway 50, and you're going to have that traffic signal right in between the top of the hill and Arrowhead in Deer Run, and I can just see what's going to happen. You're going to have a lot of traffic back up both directions, and being selfish, we're going to have a lot of traffic on Deer Run that we would not normally have. I'm all for development of Carson City. I don't have a problem with that, but I think we're being naive thinking that we're not going to have some traffic issues on both ends of this project. When it comes to the smell in rifle range, I live there. I hear the rifle range all the time. It doesn't bother me personally nor my neighbors, but I've dealt with this stuff before in my personal life, and when you start, it's nice to think that people are going to read their contracts with the builders and the real estate people, but in reality, what's going to happen is you're going to have people moving in, and then you guys will have a whole line out here of people concerned about the smell in reality. You know, it's nice to talk about, everybody should be an adult, but I've been around rifle ranges before, around smells before, so that's the only thing I have to add. Thanks for the time.
More public comment?
Right before we take more public comment, we're getting some lovely Johnny Cash or something up here through our.
Again, I think it may have stopped it.
Oh, it's some radio feed is cutting in up here. So, okay, thanks.
Would you hit your button there, sir, for your mic, and then state your name for us?
Philip Harrison, Tayo America. And first of all, I just wanted to be sure that the Planning Commission had received the letter that I sent November 20th from Tayo, and just wanted to reiterate that we are opposed to this, and if it does go through, we would like to see some mitigation measures taken to address the odor that we do put out. And another point is that we put out, and people are often, they don't get so upset over smells that they're used to, like gasoline or the treatment plant or something like that. They're familiar with those. We put out something that's a little bit different. We are a paint facility, and we use some different solvents. And so we're concerned that if a person were to smell this and it's different, they're going to wonder what it might do to them, and then talk to their neighbors, and then that starts a whole process. And that is our concern. So just wanted to go on the record to state that. Thank you.
And we appreciate you sending your letter and bringing this information forward to us, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Other public comment? Okay, seeing none, Chris? Like to respond, or?
Again, Chris Baker with Manhart Consulting here on behalf of the applicant. I just want to kind of follow up on some of the public comment. I think hearing the concerns of the industrial users, I think it is important that language not be broad-based of nuisance odors or other thing. I think it modifying that condition a little bit to be more specific, maybe to the adjacent land user's approval. You know, I don't know what they do, you know, and if the language is coming from, you know, someone who's drafting CC&Rs or from our firm, you know, it would be broad-based language that might not disclose fully, you know, what to anticipate if you are a purchaser in that subdivision. So, you know, I would recommend, you know, representing the applicant to kind of to be as transparent as possible. And I think, you know, working with those adjacent landowners to modify the disclosure language is a good way to do that. Like I said, you know, we plan on meeting with them throughout the process. You know, this is kind of step one. I heard a lot of I heard comments about concerns of, dust during construction and other things. That's governed, by NDEP and dust control permits are required and such. But if there's, certain criteria that we're not aware of, maybe hours or times of the year, things that, the adjacent land users, operations are more sensitive to things like that, it's going to be beneficial for us to know about stuff like that. So, we'll make the commitment to meet with them, but I think modifying that condition to have their input and kind of sign off on that disclosure statement is pretty important, I believe.
And possibly you could also, in meeting with them, discuss possibly some things that may not eliminate, but alleviate some of the odor, plantings, whatever maybe can be discussed, whatever. But I think it needs to be fairly specific to this particular item, because the gentlemen just don't want them coming. They're not going to get mad at you necessarily, or you wouldn't be there. They're going to get mad at Toyo, because that's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And so I think if we can, they're seeing obviously with their information, they're willing to work whatever they can. I think it would make us feel better since, working with all them. The gentleman with the dust problem, fortunately, the wind seems to be blowing away from his operation, so maybe it wouldn't affect him quite as much. But unfortunately, that's what takes the odor over your development. So
yeah,
anyway.
And I also think it's important kind of what we envision some of those land uses being. We do have an additional required buffer because there's some power lines that run through there. So a good chunk of the immediately adjacent property cannot be developed. The portion that's the 3-acre piece, we specifically made that larger to buffer. We specifically put our detention basin and some of the open space there to buffer from those uses. But more importantly, kind of what we envision marketing that portion of the property. The general commercial zoning designation in Carson allows for a wide range of uses. With a development of this sort, with a potential multifamily component, outdoor storage, boats, RVs, mini warehouses, things of that nature are going to be a need. That corner down there is an ideal location for something of that, and it would also contribute to enhancing kind of the buffer, and it would kind of function as kind of a pseudo-industrial use itself, and kind of that's the direction we've been going in the site plans that we've been playing around with, is that kind of whole area adjacent to the existing industrial uses kind of being more of a pseudo-industrial use. And then as you move towards the north, you would have complementary commercial uses, sandwich shops and things that the industrial uses could utilize during the week, but then the residents could utilize after hours. So that's kind of the vision that we have here. And as we get in more in the planning process and, potential uses, I think it's important to share that not just with the commission, but with our potential neighbors. So.
And the fact that if you're going industrial, whatever you put there, I mean, if you've got a Subway shop and you've got epoxy odors rolling through there, I mean, that's not something, it may be concerned to your industrial people as well that might be there. So again, by working with the gentleman, and I'm happy to come forward and point this stuff out, I think can maybe alleviate some of the problems down the road. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Hope Sullivan, Planning Manager. Heather didn't have the benefit of being here when we amended the master plan, so I want to speak to that. Compatibility was huge with the master plan. Protecting the industrial area that exists was huge. The board specifically discussed this at the board level after the Planning Commission made a recommendation, and the board was very clear that their expectation when this came forward was not just to have land uses creating buffers. So, for example, the way it's been designed, I think Manhart implemented what the board expectation was in terms of putting land uses that would be compatible with the adjacent industrial uses along that boundary to create a buffer between the industrial and the residential. Having said that, the board was also really specific about the disclosure. And I think your conversation this evening, or this morning, sorry, I'm used to evening meetings, was enlightening. And I don't know if it was Commissioner Tingle or the chair who said, fine, you can have a disclosure that says you're near industrial, but people aren't going to know what that means. And I think that hit me when you said that. And so I immediately thought to myself, you saw me reaching back here, I immediately thought about the findings for the special use permit. And finding 2 says, it talks about adverse impacts such as noise, vibration, fumes, odors, dust, glare, and physical activity. I would suggest that in the interest of clarity, recognizing the applicant's offer to work with adjacent owners, but adjacent owners don't do land use management. They're running their industrial businesses. I think if the idea, and again, the board pushed this hard, if you watch the board meeting, if we're doing a disclosure, let's make it as clear as possible. And let's let people know that you may have noise, vibration, fumes, odors, dust, glare, and physical activity. It's straight from our findings with an SUP. We're not talking about an SUP, but it's good language. And that way, it's not, gee, I'm near an industrial use. I wonder what that means. Oh, it's really quiet? Okay, good. It says you might have these things. And it's not just the industrial uses there today. It's the industrial uses that may establish later. Our goal is to protect that adjacent industrial area. So with that little preamble, Heather will be suggesting some modified language.
So for modification to condition 35A, I would suggest it read, the development's proximity to existing industrial properties and the inconvenience or discomfort, including but not limited to noise, vibrations, fumes, odors, dust, glare, or physical activity that may arise from living in close proximity to such operations.
And also leave about the landfill, rifle, and pistol range and disc golf, et cetera, would still be left in there as well.
Correct. I would just be suggesting modification to 35A.
Thank you. Further discussion? Commissioner Tingle.
Yes, the gentleman who spoke, I believe, Mr. Young? There's a good point that he brings up as coming down from Mount House into Carson City. You're on that downward slope, and if you've got a stoplight before you hit the bottom of that slope, granted, we haven't had a nice long winter lately, but the chance of that area being a little bit dicey, icy, could be problematic when you're coming up to a stoplight, and I don't know if there's any way around that. I would wonder if there's a plan, and I don't know if anybody might know, to put in one of those flashing warning, stoplight ahead, just so people can maybe actually decelerate before it's too late and they can't. So that's just kind of a comment that I had, is I think that's a really interesting place to put a stoplight coming down a hill.
Additionally, along that line, too, you're coming out of that 45 strip all the way from the Virginia City turnoff to get you through, and coming back from Dayton playing golf off and out there, then all of a sudden it goes 55 and they're doing 60, 65. Consideration might be to maintain that speed limit a little bit coming down. I mean, that would be a possibility to look at, maybe from 55 to 50. I don't know.
That's probably an NDOT.
Right, that would be something to do with NDOT or whatever.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's really when they get into that with NDOT, that'll something that they can discuss with them, and there may be some solutions there on that.
Chris Baker, Manhart Consulting, for the record. Originally, this was actually not the proposed ingress-egress off 50. It was actually further east, not utilizing the existing road network. During the scoping with NDOT and Carson and Traffic Works, it was determined that although the other location did meet some of NDOT's location criteria for an intersection there, because of some of those safety concerns that you brought up, it was better to relocate our original proposed intersection location utilizing the existing Draco Way, upgrading that because of the very reasons that you pointed out. It does flatten out there. We're not at the bottom of the hill per se, where when we were 300 or 400 feet up, we truly were more or less at the bottom of the hill. So this is well within NDOT's parameters. Obviously, they're going to have final sign-off on this, and if anyone's worked with NDOT, we know that they're quite thorough and take ingress egress to their roadways very seriously. So we have a condition that says we have to work with them, obviously, and provide a certain level of service, and we plan to do that.
Will our recent modification to the requirements be satisfactory that we just suggested?
Yes. Again, I'm in agreement with the conditions as modified.
Bringing it back. Further discussion or a motion? Oh, we have another public comment.
My name is Rob Gray, again, with Triangle Labs, and we're right there at 6101 Morgan Mill Road. The other concern that I was just thinking of when you're talking is that road that comes down into Morgan Mill, according to the map there, there's going to be a ton of traffic coming down that one access road, just like that gentleman in the back said, and I'll call you guys and invite you down when we're doing an equipment change out. We'll bring in a piece of equipment from Germany, millions of dollars. The riggers, we shut that road down. We got 2 or 3 big rigs with their big rigging equipment. We shut that road down. Our garage door's right there. So there's a lot of compounded stuff with this. I would suggest that there be no access at all. Look at Douglas County off of East Valley Road. There's a series of commercial buildings. East Valley Road goes there. There's no access, and there's a bunch of homes on the east side of that development. So something to consider. Huge impact to us, just to have just the traffic alone. And I can see it now. Human nature, I'm going to block that road up with a bunch of equipment, trying to move our equipment in. It's going to upset neighbors, and I'm going to get vandalism. I'm going to have vandalism coming down to my shop. I already see it now, so it's just a huge concern with this development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And along that line, Morgan Mill is, I was out there for our marijuana deal last month, drove that from Silver Oak up. I came in that way, and it's quite a narrow 2-lane. I don't know if there's any plans for upgrade. I think there were plans for upgrade of Morgan Mill or not.
Stephen Pote for the record. I don't believe there were any requirements in the traffic impact study to upgrade Morgan Mill. They're showing that it was going to operate at an acceptable level of service there at Deer Run and Morgan Mill.
Because there's no sidewalks or anything else. I know there's a couple kids fishing down by the parking area there and that sort of thing. It's a fairly quiet area back in there.
It's the other side of Deer Run.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah, you're down by the park.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is the other side of Deer Run.
Excuse me, I went too far. Thank you. Bless you.
Thank you.
And any further? You try that?
Do we do them one at a time? Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of ZMA 18-155, a zoning map amendment for a 119.1 acre site from general industrial to single-family 6,000 for approximately 68.3 acres, multifamily apartment for approximately 18 acres, general commercial for approximately 13.9 acres, and public regional for approximately 18.9 acres for property located southeast of U.S. Highway 50 and northeast of Deer Run Road within the V&T specific plan area based on the ability to make the required findings as stated in the staff report.
Do we need to add the amendments to the conditions that are at all?
No, this.
Is there, at what point, is there any way that we can, it's just before we move forward, to have staff or somebody involved as far as the writing of the review or something to see how it's going to be addressed as to how it's going to go to the people, the applicants?
We can recap when you're finished with the zoning map amendment. We can recap on what the staff's recommendation is in terms of the tentative map and answer questions prior to the motion on the tentative map.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Preston seconds. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Now, would you like to continue, sir?
Let me find it.
It's right below the first one. It's the TMS.
It's in the new one.
Oh, it's in the new one.
Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of TSM 18-154, a tentative subdivision map known as the Plateau Development, consisting of 270 single-family residential lots, 9 common area lots, 3 remaining parcels, and approximately 13.36 acres of right-of-way within the 119.1 acre project site area, located southeast of U.S. Highway 50 and northeast of Deer Run Road, within the V&T specific plan area, subject to the conditions of approval included in the staff report and amended in staff's memo dated November 27, 2018, and as amended today, and based on the findings as stated in the staff report.
Commissioner.
Would you like me to recap?
Sure.
So the changes to...
Need a second first?
I'll second.
Heather Ferris, for the record. The changes to the conditions that staff is proposing is the changes as written in my memo dated November 27th, 2018, to condition number 19 and number 21. Changes to condition 37, 37A should read, ownership and maintenance in perpetuity of all open space, common areas, landscaping, off-site roadway landscaping along Draco Way from the northern portion of the site to Highway 50 and the off-street trails within the development. And then change to condition 35A. A should read the development's proximity to existing industrial properties and inconvenience or discomfort, including but not limited to noise, vibrations, fumes, odors, dust, glare, or physical activity that may arise from living in close proximity to such operations.
And again, my question, is there any way that, to make sure that the way it's written between the folks from the businesses and et cetera?
So the introduction to condition 35 requires that the applicant provide the document to community development for review and approval.
Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, can take a break if we can for 5 minutes. reconvene the meeting of the Planning Commission. Thanks for the break. Moving forward. E7, presentation and discussion only regarding the 2004 Regional Transportation Plan, and it pertains to the long-range planning of Carson City's master plan.
I'll introduce Lucia. For the record, Lee Plemmel, Community Development Director. This is a presentation long in the making, trying to schedule it for the Planning Commission to get an update on what we do for long-range transportation planning. This topic comes up not only during the annual master plan review, but with development in general. Questions come up, are we planning beyond this development for the future growth of traffic? So Lucia's been with the city a little over a year now, I think, already. She's the transportation manager, and so she's going to give you an overview of transportation planning with Carson City.
Good morning, Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. As Lee said, this is long in the making and long overdue in my opinion, so really happy to be here. Thanks for your time. I dork out about this stuff, so if I start rambling, you can give me the signal to cut off. We can also be kind of informal. If you have questions as I go, feel free to interrupt. The impetus for this presentation was really to give you an understanding of what we do for long-range regional transportation planning. I'm going to kind of give you an overview of our program generally, what we do. I hope that you leave this presentation with confidence that we know what we're doing and we're looking at the things that you hope that we're looking at. And if it doesn't seem like we are, I would encourage you to comment and ask questions, and happy to explain and dig deeper where it's relevant to this body. So the Carson Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, this is a federally designated MPO, is what we call it. We were formed in 2003, and we are responsible for metropolitan transportation planning processes for the Carson City urbanized area. So what does that mean? It means we plan for regional transportation not just in Carson City, but also the urbanized area of northern Douglas County down to the Johnson Lane, Stephanie area, and also further east out into Lyon County past Dayton. So we look at regional growth and regional planning. We are staffed by Carson City Public Works Department staff who also serve as the Carson City Regional Transportation Commission. And so we wear multiple hats. The Regional Transportation Commission focuses on Carson City itself, and CAMPO focuses on this bigger regional area for transportation planning. There is a CAMPO policy board. It is an 8-member board. There are 7 voting members, including 5 from Carson City, of which 2 are Board of Supervisors, Mr. Bonkowski and Ms. Bagwell. And additionally, we have a voting member from Lyon County and one also from Douglas County. There's an ex officio non-voting member from Nevada DOT as well. CAMPO has 3 primary responsibilities. As I mentioned, we're responsible for metropolitan transportation planning, and in doing so, we must coordinate with the state DOT, NDOT, as well as transit operators. We're fortunate in that our transit operator is Jump Around Carson, the JAC transit system, which operates, again, out of Public Works under the RTC umbrella. So it's the same staff, so we closely coordinate. The second responsibility is to have a proactive public involvement process. We do this through implementation of our Public Participation Plan, the PPP. And you'll notice as I go through this presentation, there's a lot of acronyms. So if I start talking nonsense, please interrupt. And then finally, we're responsible for 3 documents, and these are the crux of what I'll go through in this presentation. The Regional Transportation Plan, the RTP, the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, and the Unified Planning Work Program, the UPWP. And these documents and this process can be visualized graphically in this chart. Through the presentation, I'll come back to this chart, so you don't have to worry about memorizing it now. But I'll start on the left with the RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan. And this plan serves as our framework. It guides what we do. And within it, we evaluate our approach. We have goals and a vision. We identify needs. In some cases, MPOs will have scenarios within their RTP. Typically, these are funding scenarios, so maybe a stagnant funding approach, but then if for some reason funding increased, what would that look like? And it creates a plan with recommended projects as well as investment programs. So more details about the RTP. This is a requirement of the MPO. It has a 20-year horizon period, so this is our long-range transportation planning document. It's required to be updated every 4 to 5 years. We update ours every 4 years. It must meet federal requirements, the MAP 21 and the FAST Act, and primarily the requirements in there, that's the heavy lift for us is the performance-based planning requirement. The federal government shifted to performance-based planning. There's a lot of performance measures and targets, and so we incorporate those through goals, objectives, performance measures, and then where appropriate, target setting. Our current RTP is the 2040 RTP, and this was approved in August of 2016. So that means we're due for a new one in 2020. Right now, we're really in the throes of implementing that plan, right? And I'll talk more about that in a moment. So back to our graphic. The RTP is the long-range planning document. If you look all the way to the right, you see the TIP. That's our investment program, the Transportation Improvement Program. And within that, you're programming, so you're funding the projects that come out of the RTP. And you're also funding smaller projects and programs. The TIP is a prioritized listing of transportation improvement projects. Again, this is your short-range document. It's a 4-year horizon period, must be updated at least every 4 years. Typically, we do amendments every year. We don't have a lot of money here in Carson, so when we get a grant or something, we typically do amendments fairly often. Must be consistent with the RTP and must include all regionally significant projects. And most importantly, everything in this TIP is fiscally constrained. So that means it's just projects that we have reasonably foreseeable funding for. So it doesn't include all those projects we'd like to do. It's just the projects we can fund in the short term. I would like to point out, if you're interested in transportation, the Nevada DOT has set up what they call an E-STIP. So our TIP rolls into the state TIP. So the state TIP, which is the funding programs for the entire state. So in Nevada, there's 4 MPOs, us, Tahoe, Washoe, and Vegas down south. And so all of our projects that we're going to fund in the next 4 years roll up into a state tip. That's available on the website on the slide. And this website has been developed and is now looked at as a national model. You can go in there and really easily filter for Campos projects. For our local projects, you can see maps, how much the projects cost, the status, all that great information. Our current tip was approved in August 2017, and so we're implementing it now. Back to the graphic. So we've looked at the long-range document, the short-range document, and now in the middle, how do we get from one to the other, and what are we doing in between those documents? I'll start with the UPWP. This is our work program. You can think of this as our strategic management tool for identifying needs and thinking ahead. It's our qualitative tool. We use a 3 C's approach, so that means it's continuous planning, comprehensive planning, and cooperative planning. We're really engaging stakeholders and partners. This document has a 1 to 2 year horizon period. We've shifted to a 2-year document. We at Carson, as I mentioned, we don't get a lot of funding, and so what we like to do is aggregate the funding that we do get annually into a 2-year program, and that allows us to take on some bigger planning initiatives to make sure we're doing it, really doing a good job. I have put on here the budget for our current UPWP just to show you. The work element 1 is administration, so this funds our local transportation staff. We have a specific line item for public outreach and engagement. This funds our website, public outreach materials, when we post things in the newspaper, that sort of thing. And then roughly equally, multimodal planning, this is that qualitative piece, is task 3. Performance management is task 4, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. And asset planning and management, so kind of how we're managing our existing assets. Back to the graphic, now we're down at the bottom. So we talked about the UPWP as our qualitative management tool. Performance planning and monitoring, that's our quantitative tool, right? Where we look at metrics, set targets, measure performance, and evaluate our approach. Again, we use a framework of goals, objectives, measures, and targets in our RTP, and this carries through everything we do. This performance planning is implemented concurrent with the UPWP, and the outputs are constantly feeding into our transportation plan and our TIP. Our performance planning is sort of in its infancy. The city implemented a complete streets performance monitoring report in 2015. After the city residents voted in a 1/8 cent sales tax for complete streets projects, downtown, South Carson, William, and North Carson, amongst some other projects. And with that, we started monitoring, right? Who's using these facilities? How many bicyclists? If we're going to invest in bike lanes, how many are using them? How many pedestrians downtown? However, we are due for an expanded performance measurement report. Staff have been working on that for the past few months, and that will really summarize all of the performance measures and everything we look at citywide, likely in early 2019. So we've talked about those 4 pieces, including the 3 key documents that Campo is responsible for, but bracketing everything is public participation. We don't do anything without outreach and engagement. It's really considered the hallmark of the transportation planning process. I mentioned the public participation plan earlier. That is a federally required document. Ours was last amended in 2012, and we have an amendment scheduled to go to the Regional Transportation Commission in 2019 of January. Ongoing stakeholder groups, Transportation Resource Advisory Forum for Carson City Traffic, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and other working groups for document amendments, plans, etc. I would also be remiss if I did not mention Carson City Connect. We don't have a lot of staff here in Carson, so we rely on our residents to report if they notice a signal is out, or something's not right, or there's a bush and you can't see around a turn. Please do report those and bring them to our attention, and we really appreciate the assistance there. So high level, the takeaway that I'd like you to take away with today is, I tried to show it on this graphic here. If you look all the way to the left in 2015, that was when we adopted our Complete Streets Monitoring Program. 2016 then, we adopted our RTP and our UPWP, our work program. 2017 then, so after we adopted our long-range plan, we adopt our TIP, which is our short-range funding plan. 2018, again with the UPWP. And through this whole period, it's public participation, right? So now we're in 2019. We're implementing our regional transportation plan. We have our TIP, so we're programming, we're building projects that we said we would build. We're doing our planning, and we're getting ready to update our performance monitoring document. We're also gearing up now for the next update of the regional transportation plan. So we simply don't have enough staff to update every document every year, nor is it required or would we want to. But you can see that we're always doing something, and we're always kind of iteratively improving what we're doing. So going back to the performance measurement and something that I think you all have interest in, I wanted to touch on the travel demand model. And this is our primary analytical tool that the city has for understanding regional travel behavior and pinch points where we have perhaps too much demand or more demand and things we should focus on for projects. We do have an ongoing contract for the maintenance of our model, and we also do regular updates. The model is in a Transcad software, so it's like a mapping software that you can think of, but it is a high-level regional forecasting tool. There are key data inputs, 3 key data inputs. The socio-demographic data, so you can think of this as the who, right? So who is making the trips? Are they workers? Are they kids, students? Are they other folks? I'll talk more about that. Zoning, you can think of this as the where. Where are the trips? Where are the origins and the houses and the bed base? And where are the destinations? Work, shopping, discretionary trips, other. And then the transportation network. So then you can think of how do the travelers get where are they going? And you can think of this as the roadway network and other modes. The model has forecast years, so you shouldn't get too hung up on the years itself, but for the 2016, the current RTP, we had a 2015 base year, so that's you can think of as existing conditions. And then we had future years. Typically, these are 10 to 15 years out for a midterm, so we use 2025, and then a long term, 2040. So I'll go through these 3 data inputs. Where are the trips? So this is primarily zoning, the master plan, the stuff that you all have input on. And what the model really cares about is, again, the bed base. So where are the trips originating? When people wake up in the morning, where are the houses, right? Where are they? And then the destinations, where are they going? Our model isn't a super complicated model. It's pretty straightforward. Primarily, it's looking at work, school, and other trips, discretionary trips primarily. So where are those trips? And that's, in the model, it looks like zoning, right? For this body, you can know that the higher the density, and as we approve zoning amendments or other things, the more trips that are going to be generated, and that'll feed into the land use file. So the second piece is who is making the trips, right? So these are your socio-demographics. Things the model cares about are number of households, right? Higher density in an area is going to be more households that are going to be making trips within the model. Single family, multifamily, et cetera. Household size. So different communities have different households, right? Some communities are younger, have more kids, bigger household size. Some communities are older and there's mixes, right, in different neighborhoods. So that's considered in there as well. Household vehicles. The presence of household vehicles indicates more vehicle trips in the model. There are households that don't have vehicle trips, so on those the trips may feed more to transit, and that's all calculated in the model. Household income also plays a factor. Households with more income traditionally make more discretionary trips, so you may see more trips generally in the PM peak period after work where you may be making more of those trips. Employment, retail and industrial, different zoning that you all care about, those impact the destinations and where people are going for their daily trips. And then schools and the presence of school-age children is also a consideration in the model. So we have our land use file, which tells us the where. We have the socio-demographic file, which tells us the who. And then, then the model's looking at, what kinds of trips or how many trips are being made. And our model was updated, and it follows the Institute of Traffic Engineers, the trip generation manual. So for every land use, there's estimated trip generation, right? All the way down to high turnover restaurants like Chick-fil-A, which tend to make more trips daily, down to industrial uses, which don't have as many workers, and there aren't a lot of discretionary trips, the retail side visiting that land use. So it's looking at all those different types of land uses. Our model also incorporates assumptions from the National Household Travel Survey. So this is a national survey which looks at household travel characteristics. So those are real life travel patterns that are getting incorporated. Here's an example of the socio-demographic map and that layer. This is South Carson, near Clearview, and South Carson and Curry down there. What you see on the thick black lines, those are called TAZs, Transportation Analysis Zones. So that's how the model distributes trips and tells us where trips are being made. Within each zone, there's a host of those sociodemographic information. On the left, 2015 housing units, you can see where the Fandango is. For example, if you can see that up there, it's that kind of, S-shaped TAZ. In 2015, we assumed 6 housing units, and in 2040, we assumed 50. Now, as this body knows, there's an apartment building, big development going up there. We didn't know that in 2015 when we were preparing the 2040 RTP. So in preparation for the 2020 RTP, as those projects get approved here in this body and at the board, we make sure that those are then incorporated for the next regional transportation plan update. Here's another map showing total employment. Again, you can kind of see, growth. We assume always a little bit of growth over time. There's not a lot of growth that was forecast regarding employment in 2015. So you'll see the numbers like at the Fandango 367 in 2015, and that was assumed to be 376 in 2040. Why is that? Well, the master plan didn't show a lot of, more jobs there in 2040. And now if we do zoning amendments or we make decisions here in this body, those decisions would then need to get updated into the model.
I have a silly question.
Sure.
So so total employment, is that the number of employed people living there or the number of people who have jobs?
Those are the...
Or like the number of jobs in that area?
You can think of it as those are the number of jobs. So those are essentially the destinations that people would go there for work trips. So that's how the model's making those trips go there during the day. You can think of it that way. So we talked about who's making the trips, where they are, and then how are they being made. So this is our road network. Functional classification, you've probably heard this term before: local roads, collector roads, arterial roads, and freeways. The transportation network layer has all sorts of characteristics built into it, right? How many lanes, presence of stoplights, the speed limit, all those sorts of things. So when the model takes the who is making the trips and the where are they going, it feeds it onto the transportation network. And that's how it gives us our outputs. So one key output we look at are daily volumes. So how many trips are being made? You can see this map, and there are handouts also in the back, and you all have them at the front. Total volumes for 2025 and 2040 are shown on this map for that South Carson area. And the first thing you'll notice is they're the same. Why are they the same? Well, when we did this in 2015, the economy hadn't really come back. We started seeing regional growth, but not necessarily from the south coming up. And so when we look at this volumes, there's not really a lot down there, at least back in 2015, that would warrant a huge increase in volumes. So as we look into the next RTP update, we want to make sure we're taking into account regional growth to the south, regional growth in Tahoe, and coming in. So those are the types of things we're looking at. This is total daily volumes up north. There's also a lot of interest in the Lomber Ranch area. The big thing to look at here is total daily volumes on William Street and I-5 and 50 up there. It sort of looks the same, but you'll see in 2040 there is more volume on William coming in. Also not a lot of change. When you look at the hard numbers, it's sort of hard to see on here, but you do see an increase in volumes on Solomon as well. A second type of output we look at is volume to capacity, right? So volumes are great, but will they fit on the roads that we have? So volume to capacity. We're back down in South Carson again. What you see here is the more yellow, red, the lighter the green, the more, you can think of it as congestion, but that's probably not the right term, but it's a ratio of how full the road is. And what you'll notice here is, wow, South Carson looks pretty red. It does look pretty red. In 2015, we anticipated that we would cut down lanes for the South Carson Street project, so that was built into 2040. However, we didn't necessarily know that volumes would decrease as drastically on South Carson as we have seen after the freeway opening. So this model is showing the lane reductions on South Carson in 2040, but it's not showing the over 45% volume reduction that we have seen since the freeway opened. So again, those are the kinds of things we're looking at. You can see that Curry Street gets a little bit lighter green. There's more traffic. Most likely what the model's doing is when it's distributing trips, it sees that South Carson is filling up and it starts distributing trips on Curry, which is what would happen in real life, right? If there's congestion, people might start taking the back roads. So that's where you start seeing these things in the model. Really quickly, I'll also show you near Lampa Ranch. You do see 5th Street at the bottom starts getting more yellow, which makes sense, right? That is a key east-west connector. So the takeaways for the model is that it is robust and it is quantitative. It is our best tool to look at regional estimates, but it is just that. It is an estimate. We can't get too hung up on the individual numbers, but we need to make sure they make sense. The big takeaways are it doesn't look at conceptual development projects. So when you all are seeing proposals or conceptual projects like zoning amendments where we don't have necessarily a concrete project, those are not in the model yet. Our staff, we just don't have the resources to model all these individual projects. We rely on the developers to do these the traffic impact studies. And we help with scoping those and we look at those and make sure they make sense, but those studies aren't done by our staff. It doesn't look at individual intersections, so it's not going to tell you how you feel when you enter that intersection and it seems really busy. We're not going to get that from this model. And then the outputs are only as good as the inputs. So you'll see in the master plan presentation from Lee that there's a parcel level water analysis that's being done looking at forecast utility and water usage. So more than ever before, we're cross-coordinating across departments and making sure that our growth assumptions are in line and we're all using the same numbers. And that's going to be critical for moving forward in the future. Just to wrap up, next steps, the model update. So we are undergoing the model update now. We're incorporating all the great projects that have been approved in the last year. And since our last RTP update, that should be complete in the next couple months. Ongoing model maintenance. And then the 2045 RTP, and I would love to get you all involved. Vision and goals, we'll be reviewing it next fall. We'll be conducting a needs assessment and most likely doing funding scenarios over the next winter, 2019-2020. You'll get draft projects and mapping in the spring of 2020, and then the draft and final RTP will be adopted in calendar year 2020. So happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks for letting me go on my spiel.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. So you make your adjustments in other words, those apartments open up, then you'll make your adjustments at that time kind of thing? Is that how?
That's correct. And we don't use the model all that often, right? We're using it when we're looking at, the transportation plan or a corridor study when we're getting ready to do South Carson or downtown or something like that. And so there may be periods where we don't make the updates and kind of save them up and then do them at once with our contractor. So that's kind of the process that we're in now.
Thank you very much for that. Okay. Next, the last item on for this morning, MIPA-18-161 for possible action to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors regarding the 2018 Annual Master Plan Report. Lee?
Thank you. Lee Plemel, Community Development Director. I'll be going through this presentation for you. This is our annual master plan report per NRS, Nevada state law, and the master plan. The Planning Commission is to annually review the master plan and make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors regarding its implementation. So that's what we do every year in November generally. And I'll take this opportunity. I know this Planning Commission, particularly the 5 of you that are here today, have experience with the master plan, generally have been through this before, are well versed in it. But I'll take just a couple extra minutes to kind of go through it for anybody else watching. And unfortunately, Alex is not able to make it this morning. Well, hopefully he's okay. I'll be here this evening. So the master plan was adopted originally in 2006, and hopefully you've all read through the document and kind of generally know what a master plan is. So just want to briefly take a moment. What is a master plan? And I've put up there on the screen this is directly text right out of the beginning of the document, so I won't read all of it, but it's an advisory document. It's a policy document that outlines the Carson City's visions and goals for the future. Those policies are used in recommendations for actions on the land use map and other types of development decisions that you make, which you experience all the time. As I noted, it says right in there it should be reviewed annually to make sure it's updated and complies with our most recent laws and policies, and it's a blueprint for the next 20 years. It's generally what a comprehensive plan is guidance over the next 20 years. Now, obviously, this was adopted a little more about 12 years ago. We always talk about whether those policies are still valid or not, and I'll get into a little bit of that with the recommendations for the next year as to what we plan on doing. So what the master plan is not zoning. It's not the law of what you do, of what you're required to do. It's the policy, and we implement it through Title 18 and development standards and other actions that the city takes. Again, I'll talk a little bit about that and possible Title 18 updates when I get to the recommendations. So just going through, as I said, the master plan it's a 20-year document, which certainly isn't a horizon in which Carson City is going to be done growing and building out, but the land use plan does provide for land use and the build out of the city, which in this case was, when it was adopted, was roughly estimated based on the city's capacity to provide water and water availability in particular, which is a build out population of 75 to 80,000. Now, water usage is more than just people, so you have to have other factors with that, but that based on the land use, based on our current land use, we would end up with about a population of 75 to 80,000 people in Carson City. How far out is that? On the screen up there is our growth projections that we've been using, and with other long-range planning efforts, including transportation, water, sewer, etc. And basically the black dots there going out, not as far as the other lines, are the demographers' recent estimates. Those are economic based, so they vary over the years. But the city's high and low estimates are those other two lines that project out. The high estimate is about a 1% average growth rate, which is what we've seen. That equals, and in fact, that graph, what the input that creates that line up there is 300 residential units per year that would create that population. And the next graph will show where that is and kind of where we fall. And the lower one, and that higher one is that would result in about a 1% growth rate. The lower one is about half that units per year and what that growth would result in. So as I mentioned, going to this graph shows the number of residential units we've had per year. This chart goes back to 1996, a period when we had more. So I mentioned that 300 per year, that higher line, and here's where 300 falls, and obviously for the last 15 years or so, we haven't been that high, but we're getting back up to a time economically where we may be approaching that. But so I think that's a good high estimate. Probably be somewhere between that high, on average over time, somewhere between that high and low growth rate to get to our population build out. So that transitions me into this residential capacity analysis, which we talked about. We talked about this last year and our plan to do not just a residential capacity analysis, but to do that and tie that into a water capacity build out analysis for Carson City. So, let me talk about residential growth first, then I'll give a little bit more of an update on the overall capacity analysis. So these charts up here represent our capacity based on our master plan and the lands that are designated for residential development for future growth. The chart on the left is the total number of residential units that we have now, with the left bar being how many residential units we have now, and the one right next to that, the higher bar, is how many residential units we would have in Carson City to have that 75 to 80,000 population. These are all just very rounded numbers too. Obviously, every day as building permits come in, they change and get updated. So these are very rounded numbers, especially projecting out that far. So basically, that's about 8,400 units that Carson City can still have and accommodate before we reach that population threshold. So moving over to the chart to the right, I've transferred that 84,000 is, of the three bars on the right, the 84,000 is the left-hand bar. Now, in working with Public Works in this water analysis, I've actually gone through on a parcel-by-parcel basis and looked at the master plan land use residential designation, existing projects, plus existing projects, to look at a maximum. I did a high and low estimate, as you can see by these charts, but basically a maximum density that could be provided under the current land use designation and potential zoning. And as it shows, even at the high estimate, the bar on the far right, if we develop and redeveloped all existing residential properties to their maximum permitted density, we would still be below that total unit count of 32,000 residential units, or the additional 8,400 in this case, to get to that threshold population. Basically, in summary, what all that says is we haven't over-allocated residential land in our master plan currently. Now, we want to use this too as we consider changes in the master plan or new special use permits for residential uses in commercial properties. That would increase this number. That makes that bar go up closer to that build-out number. And I think at that point, transitioning now to the water analysis, I think the more importantly is going to be this overall capacity analysis where we consider the water usage. And when somebody comes in and requests that residential project in commercial zoning, that has an impact on the number of residential units, but that's just a different use of land. Maybe more importantly, the question is, how does that affect our build-out available water usage? So what we've been working with Public Works on is a water capacity analysis. It's taken a long time. It's still in the works. We don't have results for you today. It's getting close. We'll bring it back. But it's also taking a little longer because I think we started off thinking it would be a high-level water acre-foot capacity analysis. Do we have enough water for build-out? But once we got into it, we've gone now to where it's going to be on a parcel-to-parcel basis that we can track. That helps the water usage because a lot of water usage over in one area is not necessarily the same as water usage in another area because the infrastructure is different from one end of the city to another. So this gives them that kind of level of detail and input. And again, like I said, it'll also it includes not only this residential growth, but some estimates on non-residential, the commercial and industrial growth on a location basis, so that as development comes in, it can be updated, and we can use this for future modeling. It'll also tie in. We've always worked with transportation as well to kind of make these estimates for the future, but this will give us. Putting this in GIS now and having this is going to give us a really good model that everybody can use to track the growth and have those inputs into transportation and water modeling. At this point, I just want to take a quick break, break in my presentation to have Dan Stuckey from City Engineer to give an update on
what we're doing with the water analysis.
Yeah, so Dan Stuckey, city engineer for the record. I think Lee really explained it well. I do apologize. I know we wanted to get it in front of you guys today, the results. And really, as this project's evolved, we've felt that the value to get it down to the parcel scale is very important because it's going to better, not just, it's great to have a projection of the future and what your overall water usage is in the city, but if you can get it down spatially to where those areas where there's going to be demand and growth, like Lee said, from an water infrastructure standpoint, it's really valuable to us because we can better plan, develop future projects. We can also, when there is a zoning change, we can implement that into the model really quickly and just change that and see what that does to other areas. And we do have a really good model that we use right now. So really this is taking it to the next level and really at a finer detail. And we're also using the most current water usage data. I think as technologies advance and GIS spatial analysis capabilities, we have a lot better tools nowadays to more effectively analyze this and then project out growth. So, all the preliminary results are basically right in line with what we projected in the past as far as build out water usage. So I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of change there. But again, the value of this, the deliverable that we're going to get from this, that it's in a GIS database and something that we can use as kind of a living model, not something that sits on the shelf and, we have to update every 5 years, but something that we can update in real time as we move through these developments. So it's, I think, a really valuable thing. And once we get those final results, we will come back and present to you all.
Okay, I'm going to...
I haven't gotten the numbers we're still tweaking some things. I guess overall, based off the initial projections I've seen, a lot of the overall build out, we've done a fairly good job in the past estimating that for the future. So it's really close to what we've done, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So I guess that was a little surprising because you would expect there to be a little bit, and there's some changes there, but for the most part, it seems to be projecting a lot in line with what we projected in the past. So I guess maybe that was a little bit of a surprise.
A couple of things. Do you work with Ed James with the Carson Water Subconservancy District, I'm assuming, and I shouldn't assume that, but...
Yes, we do.
Okay, so you are in collaboration with him, if you will. Because I know Ed and I have had frequent conversations about water. Hope knows that it's one of my trigger points in that we are currently purchasing water from the town of Minden and I believe from Lyon County, because some of the water sources that we have, that we are drawing from, the arsenic levels are too high, and they don't meet EPA standards. So we are purchasing the water at however much we're paying for that at our current population level. So now we look to build out another 20,000 people according to current population, which is, I believe, somewhere around 55,000, and we're looking to build out to 75 to 80,000. So, assuming, always dangerous, that Minden and Lyon County don't run short of water, because I know there's no such thing as climate change, and we don't have any issues with, no snow anymore, or winters that aren't exactly like we used to have them that would recharge that groundwater table. So I'm just kind of wondering, are those two things somewhere in your model where you can say with some certainty that by 2065 we're going to have the water resources necessary to support a population of 75 to 80,000 people here? And that's just, you can't make that guarantee, I know you can't, but at least are those two items somewhere on the horizon?
Yeah, so in this model, it's purely looking at demand. So to answer your question, it's not really looking at where the water's coming from or production like that, because it's just a different type of model. But we are looking at that all the time as far as planning for the future, and there's a number of different options that we're currently looking at and that we've looked at in the past. Upgrades to our water treatment plant to be able to better treat and keep up with regulations up there and be able to use more of the surface water. We have well rehabilitation projects to make our wells more efficient, better capacity there. There's some other storage type projects that we have planned in the future. So we have a pretty diverse portfolio of water, which is a good thing for Carson City. But yeah, to answer your question, this does not address that directly. This is more on the demand side, but we are absolutely 100% planning in the future. We just hired a new water utility manager. He's very, very sharp, very capable, and this is number one on his list to be looking at those things.
Well, and to clarify, there's not necessarily a shortage of water. We're doing the water with Douglas County and that to blend to avoid putting in an arsenic plant because the EPA keeps changing the levels. So it's not that there's a water shortage, it's just a cheaper way at this time. And from what I understand, there's basically an aquifer from here to Fallon that's pretty much limitless underneath Carson City, so the water is there. It's just the quality. That's what I understand.
Right,
But
okay.
some water, Dave Berger is a buddy of mine, and I've known for years, worked for the state and their water, and had told me about that. But anyway, that's the reason it's not, the arsenic levels keep getting adjusted, and this was a cheaper way to do it. Well, I mean, we all survived at much higher levels, there's no problem. I mean, sometimes you go to the ridiculous.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I'll transition now quickly towards the recommendations for next year, so then we can have some discussion on that. I've noted in the staff report, I'll breeze through these, some map corrections, a couple of which were noted last year but haven't made the corrections yet, where the existing land use and zoning doesn't necessarily match in the master plan or what's built. One of this first one here being off of Arrowhead and Northgate Lane. Also noted the area where Home Depot is and that shopping center that's zoned industrial. It's come up recently in another proposed project while the master plan says it's commercial. And it is certainly an area where we want the commercial uses, the zoning still industrial there. So these are some items we'll bring back in the next year to have those, notify the property owners and surrounding property owners and make the discussion. Make the application to make those changes. And then we also have in the last year, very recently, a open space purchase property known as the Ham property up just south of the Timberline area, so it's currently designated as private property for most of it. But that should be now designated as open space. So as noted in the staff report, kind of some of the conclusions, and these is kind of the similar conclusions that we've come to over the last few years. It's certainly master plan is a long-term policy. And so far, we've had we've had a few master plan amendments, and as I note in the staff report, even in the last year, the master plan amendments we've received are actually in conformance with policies in the master plan that said those master plan amendments should be made. So there's nothing, we haven't seen a unusual request for things that indicate the land use map is very far out of whack and that the broad policy statements are still pretty relevant. So going into the recommendations for next year, and these are in the order that they're in the staff report generally there. I had the first one is completing new permitting software implementation. Just for everybody, this really doesn't directly affect the Planning Commission, but I do note it because it's implementing the board's strategic goals and also implementing our new city manager's strategic goals for next year for implementing the board goals. And it's important. It's going to take a lot of time with city staff. So that's kind of one of the reasons I really put it in here. We're going to be meeting with the consultant team twice a month for 3 days a week. So it's every other week, 3 days a week to implement the new software, which is going to be great for permitting and tracking. We have all the departments involved. It's all building permits, planning and zoning permits. It's going to be GIS-based, electronic-based, just a much better, we have a very outdated system now, so that it's going to be improvement for the customers and the city alike. So that's a big project we're taking on in the next year. updating accessory dwelling standards is a carryover from last year. We've had the discussion, and it's really going to, I think, and I have that separate from the next one, which is a Planning Commission review of Title 18 in general, because I think we're going to pull out the accessory dwelling units. We have some specific direction on those that we want to pursue, so you'll see an ordinance on that sooner than later. But moving on to the next recommendation, and I talked to the chair about this a bit, is going over Title 18 and the development standards with the Planning Commission on some sort of sequential or systematic way, not kind of throwing everything at you at once, but going through it, so help you understand it and to identify where we have potential areas that we might want to consider modifications, such as with accessory dwellings, where we had yet another one tonight. Maybe the standards remain appropriate, maybe they need to be modified a little bit. But this also is something that ties in with the city managers and board goals to update these documents. So I think taking some time with the Planning Commission on this would be important for next year. Number 4 up there is completing those map corrections that I noted earlier, and then the last one is not necessarily in your staff report, but again, I think as the new board, we have a new board member coming in starting next year in 2019. Stacy Giomi got elected. That may or may not shift board goals, but in any case, they're going to be having strategic planning sessions early in 2019, and depending, a comprehensive update of the master plan, meaning a lot of public participation has come up as a possible goal. It's a big project, probably need help and need some funding to do that. So if that raises to the level of high board priority, we'll take that on when the time comes. As I said, these are typically 20-year documents. We're about 12 years into this master plan. Eventually, it's going to be time to do an update. We're supportive of that, but we'll see how that shakes out relative to the priority of other projects in the city. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take questions.
And I had it highlighted, number 3, review Title 18 development standards. In our printout, it says the Planning Division should review Title 18 and the development standards recommended to the Board of Supervisors for possible amendment. Would you do
it's
that
the Planning Commission. That should say Planning Commission, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah,
I thought, we've discussed that, but I thought maybe you would want to review them first, because you could do it on your own scale and then bring them to us. I don't know how you see that working.
Yeah, maybe that certain thing. We certainly have a list. We're continuing to compile a list of the kind of the things, the tweaks that need to be made. Some things that over the years we discover in actually implementing it that haven't raised to the level of really needing to bring it to, but something we would definitely want to clean up as we go through it. So we definitely are doing that level of review, but I think that is the goal, is to have a review with the Planning Commission is what that should say.
And that would be more of an education type thing rather than a change or modify whatever.
It could result in direction, some discussion and direction for changes.
Okay.
Lee, would that be in a regular meeting or would that be in a workshop?
I think that's open for discussion. I kind of envisioned it being as part of a scheduled meeting, but it doesn't have to be.
Because we do have a couple fairly new commissioners, and there's a couple up for appointment or reappointment in next month, actually, and it will be the first time that the supervisors will bring forward recommendations or whatever. So
yeah, I mean,
it would be a good timing to possibly have a workshop, whether it be on this or just generally looking at information and sharing as a group.
Yeah, and depending on
advantage of the knowledge that we have brought on with Commissioner Preston from your side of the street, with the contractual stuff.
Yeah, it's something that lends itself more to a workshop format, so we'll consider that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So,
you want a motion?
Yeah. Any public comment on this item at this time? If not, we'll bring it back for a motion, and I'll gladly make a motion. I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors acceptance of the Master Plan Annual Report as presented by staff. from Commissioner Borders. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Great. At this point, is there any other general public comment we need before we break for lunch? We will be coming back at 5 o'clock, as was noted, for a couple more items. And otherwise, we will adjourn until 5 o'clock, or, all right. Thank you.
You can leave.